The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday, a day so aggressively ordinary it felt insulting. I was in my Chicago apartment trying to coax a finicky ficus back to life when my dad's name flashed on my phone. We spoke every Sunday, like clockwork. A Tuesday call meant one of two things. He'd pocket-dialed me again, or something was wrong. It was wrong. My mother was gone. A sudden, massive aneurysm. No warning, no goodbyes, just a void where the warmest person I'd ever known used to be. A week later, I was back in Ohio, in the house on Maple Crest Drive, the house I grew up in. It was a handsome two-story colonial, the kind of place people who use the phrase good bones would admire. It had a big front porch with a swing, a sprawling backyard that backed onto a dense patch of woods, and a scent I could never quite place. A mixture of my mom's lavender soap, old books, and something else, something deeper, something like damp earth and cold stone. My father, a man I'd always seen as a pillar of quiet strength, seemed to have shrunk. He moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost himself, his shoulders perpetually slumped. The task ahead of us was monumental, to sort through a lifetime of my mother's things, to dismantle the museum of our family, piece by piece. The first few days were a blur of sympathetic neighbors, casseroles, and the suffocating weight of shared grief. We started in the living room, boxing up knickknacks and photo albums. It was there, looking at a picture of myself as a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, with a gap-toothed grin standing by the basement door, that the first flicker of a forgotten memory ignited. I hated that basement, I said, more to myself than to my dad. He looked up from a box of vinyl records. Oh? I don't remember that. Yeah, I said, the memory sharpening. It was always so cold, and I had this weird game I used to play. A game? I called it Beat the Whisper. I'd stand at the top of the stairs, and I had to run down, grab a specific toy from the chest down there, and run back up before the whispering started. My dad's face went strangely blank. He put the record he was holding down with meticulous, slow care. That's an imaginative game, honey. All kids have them. But it wasn't just imaginative. I remembered the feeling now, the prickling on the back of my neck, the distinct, gut-wrenching certainty that if I wasn't fast enough, a voice would say my name from the darkest corner of the room, and something terrible would happen. I'd never told my parents about it. It was a secret, childish fear, the kind you're too embarrassed to admit. I shook it off. Grief plays tricks on the mind, dredging up old anxieties. We kept working. The attic was where things truly began to unravel. It was my mother's domain, a meticulously organized archive of our lives. Christmas decorations, old report cards, my hideous prom dress vacuum-sealed in plastic. Tucked away in the far corner, under a heavy canvas tarp, was her old steamer trunk from college. I hadn't seen it in years. "Dad, do you have the key for this?" I called down the pull-down ladder. "Should be in the dish on my dresser, sweetie," he hollered back. It was a small, ornate brass key. With a groan of protest, the old locks clicked open. The trunk smelled of cedar and thyme. Inside were her college sweaters, a faded photo of her and my dad, and beneath it all, a set of journals. They were beautiful leather-bound books with creamy, unlined pages filled with her elegant looping script. I smiled, thinking they were her college diaries. I sat down on the dusty floorboards, the single bare bulb casting long shadows around me, and opened the first one. The date on the first page was a month after they moved into the house on Maple Crest Drive. I was 2 years old. October 12. We're finally in. The house is everything we dreamed of. A bit of a money pit, sure, but it's ours. Tom is so proud he can barely stand it.
Little Sarah has so much room to run around. Her new favorite spot is the landing on the main staircase. She sits there for hours, just babbling away. It's adorable. She seems to be talking to someone, a little imaginary friend. Every time I ask who she's talking to, she just giggles and points to the empty space beside her. I smiled. I had no memory of this, of course. I flipped through a few more pages. They were filled with the mundane joys of a new home and a young family. Then, the tone began to shift. November 4th. Sarah said her friend's name today. She calls him Leo. She says he lives in the walls. Tom thinks it's cute. I'm not so sure. Last night, I was putting her to bed and she said, "Leo's sad tonight. He's cold." I went downstairs and the thermostat had been turned all the way down to 50 degrees. Tom swore he hadn't touched it. Probably just faulty wiring in this old place. November 28th. It's getting colder. There are spots in the house that are just frigid. The bottom of the basement stairs, the corner of the dining room, and the spot on the landing where Sarah talks to Leo. I can walk through a warm hallway and step into a pocket of air that feels like a meat locker. Tom felt it too, but he just shrugged and said we need to get the insulation checked. But it's more than that. It's a heavy cold, a watching cold. My own blood ran a little chill. I remembered that cold spot on the landing. I'd always thought it was just a draft from the big picture window. I kept reading, my heart starting to beat a little faster. December 15th. I can hear noises at night now. Not the usual creaks and groans of an old house. This is different. It sounds like footsteps in the attic, right above our bedroom. Tom went up to check twice. Nothing. But the moment his head hits the pillow, it starts again. A slow, deliberate pacing, back and forth, back and forth. And sometimes, very late at night, I hear music, a faint, tinny melody like a child's music box. We don't own a music box. January 9th. Something happened today that I can't explain. I can't tell Tom. He'll think I'm losing my mind. I was in the kitchen, and Sarah was in the living room with her blocks. I heard her start to cry. I ran in, and all of her blocks, every single one, were stacked in a perfect, impossibly high tower in the center of the room. It was taller than she was. She was huddled in the corner, pointing at it and sobbing, "Leo did it! Leo's angry!" There's no way she could have built that. No way! I slammed the journal shut. The dust motes swirling in the beam of light seemed to coalesce into shapes. The silence of the attic pressed in on me, suddenly heavy and alive. This wasn't just a mother cataloging cute, quirky childhood behavior. This was a record of fear. My mother, the calm, rational center of our family, had been terrified. I took the journals downstairs. My father was in the kitchen, making tea, his back to me. "Dad, I found Mom's old journals." He stiffened but didn't turn around. "Oh, I thought I'd gotten rid of all those." "Gotten rid of them? Why? They're about the house, about me." I opened one and read the passage about the blocks aloud. His shoulders tensed with every word. When he finished, the only sound was the kettle beginning to whistle. He turned around slowly, and the look on his face was one I'd never seen before. It was a combination of profound sadness and a deep, ancient fear. "We should have told you, Sarah," he said, his voice raspy. "Your mother, she wanted to, but we were so scared. We just wanted you to have a normal life. We wanted to forget." "Forget what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What happened in this house?" And so the story came pouring out. It wasn't a single neat narrative, but a torrent of fragmented, horrifying memories that they had suppressed for over 25 years. My imaginary friend, Leo, was not imaginary. From the moment we moved in, things were wrong. It started small. The cold spots, the whispers that seemed to ride on the edge of hearing, they tried to rationalize it all. Old house, faulty wiring, overactive imaginations. But then, it started to focus on me. My toys would rearrange themselves in my room while I slept. I'd wake up and my dolls would be sitting in a circle, facing my bed. My dad told me one night he came in to check on me and found me fast asleep, but every single piece of furniture in my room, my dresser, my toy box, my little rocking chair, had been pushed silently against my door, barricading me in. The whispers I remembered in the basement weren't a game. They were real. My parents would hear them too, a faint, sibilant murmur coming from the dark corners. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone was hateful, malevolent. The entity, the thing they came to believe was the spirit of a boy named Leo who had died in the house decades earlier, was possessive of me. He hated us, my dad said, his eyes distant and haunted. He hated your mother especially. He saw her as a rival for your attention. Things would happen to her. She'd be coming down the stairs and feel a shove from behind with no one there. Her favorite teacup, the one her grandmother gave her, flew off a shelf and shattered against the wall right in front of her eyes. He walked over to the fireplace and pointed at a faint, spidery crack in the marble mantelpiece. That happened one night. A heavy iron poker was lifted out of its stand and was hurled across the room. It hit right there. You were asleep upstairs. I stared at the crack, a feature of the house I'd seen a million times and never once questioned. Now it looked like a scar, a wound. My mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the warm, sun-drenched memories of my childhood with this dark, terrifying undercurrent. The picnics in the backyard, my mom pushing me on the swing, my dad teaching me to ride a bike. It was all real, but layered beneath it was another reality, where my parents were living in a constant state of low-grade terror, putting on brave faces for their little girl. Why didn't we move? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We tried, he said, sighing heavily. We were young, we'd sunk every penny we had into this place. We couldn't afford to just walk away. We brought in a priest once, a kind man, Father Michael. He blessed the house, said some prayers. For a week, it was quiet. We thought it was over. Then it came back, angrier than before. That's when he told me about the final night, the night that finally broke them. I was about 6 years old. I had a terrible case of the flu and had been running a high fever for 2 days. My mother was sleeping on a cot in my room to keep an eye on me. In the middle of the night, she woke up to a feeling of intense cold. She told my father it was a cold that felt like it was inside her bones, a dead cold. She opened her eyes. I was no longer in my bed. The bedroom door was open a crack, spilling a thin line of hallway light into the room, and I was standing in the doorway, just standing there, my back to her, perfectly still. She called my name softly at first. Sarah, honey, what's wrong? You need to be in bed. I didn't answer. I didn't move. She got up and walked towards me. As she got closer, she could hear a sound, a low, soft humming. It was a tune she didn't recognize, and she realized it was coming from me. Sarah, baby, talk to me, she said, her voice starting to tremble. She reached out to touch my shoulder. The moment her fingers made contact, I stopped humming. My dad had to stop here. He buried his face in his hands, and his body shook with a sob he'd clearly held back for decades. I went to him, putting my arms around his shaking shoulders. Dad, what is it? What did she see? He took a deep, shuddering breath. It was your face, Sarah, but your eyes weren't your eyes. They were dark, empty, and the voice that came out of your mouth was not your voice. It was a boy's voice, and it said, "She's mine now. You can't have her." I felt like I was going to be sick. My mother screamed. She snatched me up, and I immediately went limp in her arms, my feverish head falling against her shoulder as if I'd been asleep the whole time. The scream woke my dad, who came running. They saw nothing, but the room was arctic cold, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of hatred. That was the end. They didn't care about the money anymore. They didn't care about anything but getting me out of that house. My dad called a realtor the very next day. They put the house on the market, packed our most essential belongings, and within
And they did. The activity never returned to that horrifying peak. There were still odd occurrences, a door creaking open on its own, a fleeting shadow in the corner of an eye, but they were faint echoes, whispers of the terror that had once been. They learned to live with it, to ignore it. They built a wall of denial around our family, and it was so successful that I never even knew it was there. As my father finished his story, the house around us seemed to change. The familiar, comforting walls suddenly felt thin, like a membrane stretched over a dark and breathing secret. The gentle groan of the pipes was no longer just plumbing. The shadows in the corners were no longer just shadows. The scent of damp earth I'd always noticed was the smell of the grave. I finally understood my whole childhood was a lie. A beautiful, loving, well-intentioned lie designed to protect me from a truth my parents could barely comprehend themselves. They hadn't just been raising a daughter, they had been standing guard every single day. That night, I couldn't sleep in my old childhood bedroom. The floral wallpaper and the canopy bed that had once seemed so princess-like now felt like a stage set for a horror movie. I lay on the couch in the living room, staring into the darkness, listening to the house breathe around me. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A sound from the floor above, a soft, rhythmic creak. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a small rubber ball being bounced slowly and deliberately on the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway, right outside my old bedroom. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. It was a sound I remembered, a sound I'd heard countless times as a child, and assumed was my dad walking around, or the house settling. But now, filtered through the truth, it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. Thump, thump, thump. It stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I held my breath, listening. And then, from the top of the stairs, a whisper, so faint it was almost imaginary, but I heard it as clearly as if it were spoken into my ear. A child's voice, raspy and cold. "Sarah." I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a knot of pure ice. I lay there, paralyzed, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, chasing the deepest shadows away. The next morning, I told my dad we had to finish. We couldn't just leave my mother's things here. We worked with a frantic, silent energy. We didn't sort, we just packed. Boxes were filled and labeled donate or trash. We were no longer curators of a family museum. We were evacuating a contaminated zone. The entire time, I felt like we were being watched. I'd catch a flicker of movement in the reflection of a window, or hear the floorboards creak in the room just after I'd left it. It was toying with us. It knew that we knew. The secret was out and the truce was over. The last room was the basement. We'd been avoiding it. My dad swung the heavy door open, and a wave of cold, musty air washed over us. It was exactly as I remembered. Concrete floor, stone walls, a single pull-chain bulb in the center, and the toy chest, sitting against the far wall, the same one from my Beat the Whisper game. "Let's just leave it," I said, my voice tight. "No," my dad said, with his jaw set with a new grim determination. "No more leaving things. We finish this." He walked down the wooden stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He went to the chest and lifted the heavy lid. I stayed at the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the doorknob, my childhood fear a living thing in my chest. He reached inside and pulled out an old dusty teddy bear, a few broken crayons, and then his hands stopped. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just reached in and pulled something out. It was a small wooden carving of a little boy, crudely whittled, with chipped paint and two dark, hollowed-out holes for eyes. "I've never seen this in my life," he whispered, turning it over in his hands. As his fingers brushed the back of the carving, a sound filled the basement. It wasn't a whisper. It was a laugh, a cold, cruel child's laugh that came from every corner of the room at once. The single light bulb above my dad's head flickered violently, then went out, plunging the basement into absolute darkness. I screamed, "Dad, get out of there!" I heard a clatter, the wooden figure dropping to the concrete floor. I heard my dad scrambling in the dark, and then his footsteps pounding on the stairs. He burst out of the doorway, slamming the door shut behind him and fumbling to turn the deadbolt. We stood there panting in the bright, cheerful kitchen, our backs pressed against the basement door, as if to hold back the tide of darkness within. We didn't say a word. We grabbed our coats, our car keys, and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew if I did, I would see a small face looking out from my childhood bedroom window. We sold the house. We hired a service to clear it out, telling them to throw everything away. We took only the photos and a few of my mother's journals. My dad moved into a condo a few towns over. The house on Maple Crest Drive sold quickly to a young family, a couple with a little girl. My dad wanted to warn them. I told him not to. What could we say? By the way, your house is haunted by the malevolent spirit of a possessive little boy who will try to claim your daughter as his own? They'd think we were insane. Like my parents before me, I chose silence. I pray every day that I made the right choice. I don't know if Leo was ever real or what he was, but I know he was evil. And I know he fed on secrecy and fear. My parents gave him the secrecy to protect me, and in doing so, they lived with the fear for a lifetime. Their silence was a gift, a shield they held up against a darkness I never knew existed. It was the greatest act of love I have ever known. But sometimes, in the dead of night in my quiet Chicago apartment, I'll hear a faint sound from the other room, a sound like a small rubber ball bouncing slowly on the hardwood floor.